My name is Mary Jacobs. I'm from the Seneca Nation, and I'm a member of the Turtle Clan. I have been doing beadwork since I was probably about a teenager, and I also incorporate the beadwork into traditional clothing and more contemporary items that you could use for like cell phones, purses, and hair pieces.
My name is Samantha Jacobs. I am Seneca from the Cattaraugus Reservation. Mary's my mother. I am a community educator with the Seneca Language and Culture Department for the Seneca Nation, and I work at the Stanley Sully Huff Cultural and Heritage Center, where we teach community classes. On Mondays we do crafts, and on Tuesdays we do beadwork. So we are constantly sharing patterns and doing research to be able to bring those pieces back to our community to revitalize those beadwork. So today we're here to talk about the Match Safe. Taking a look at it, we were able to distinguish that it was probably a picture frame pattern that they adapted to create a pocket on the front to hold the matches. As we're looking at it, we can kind of figure out, based on the style and the color of beads, that it's probably a Mohawk piece done in probably a cottage style. So one family member probably did the pattern, another family member did the beadwork, another family member did the sewing. Based on the fringe, we can see that's similar to a Tuscarora style with the multicolored beads on the bottom. Normally we would have seen spring purlin beads on those fringes. Looking at some of the different construction of the piece itself, we can tell that the pocket on the front is actually one large pocket that they then used two separate stitches with beads to make the center fold in the middle to create two pockets. So that's something as a maker we're able to look at and figure out how to reproduce that in order to make sure that it pays homage to the original pattern, but also to be able to recreate it and then teach it to our own bead group to then revitalize those patterns within our communities.
We weren't quite sure what exactly this portion here on front of the pockets represents.
We thought maybe it might have been a stylized matches hanging out of like a bundle, which is interesting because it kind of is similar to when the Haudenosaunee Confederacy was formed. They had a bundle of arrows to represent strength. And in order to have a strong home, you need to be a home that's warm and to be able to keep your family protected. So they might be similar design motif there. Based on the design elements, we can figure out that they use the paper pattern underneath the birds. And again, it's a very common way to make your motifs on your beaded pieces. One of the other things we noticed too about the actual bird that's beaded here, it's a flat bird. And a majority of the Mohawk pieces from this time period are very heavily beaded. And our idea is that maybe they didn't have enough beads to be able to create a fully raised beaded bird. So this one is flat, and if you notice, it has a very distinctive blue eyeball. So we were kind of tossing around the idea of what kind of bird it could possibly be, whether like if they raise their own animals, it might be a baby chick, or it could be like a baby owl or a pigeon, something along those lines. But that's something that we like to take a look at, is how they designed and constructed the bird itself. So a lot of times, if you can notice, there's actually like 3 different areas in how they constructed the bird. So they did the back, they did the belly, and then they filled in the middle. And that's a very classic design that they use within the raised beadwork. But this particular example is flat. The other thing we like to point out too is we're not fans of fringe. And if you see, this piece has multiple areas of fringe, and you see the one in the middle is actually missing because it's 3, 2, and then 3. And you can see this thread hanging out. And one of the things that we always tell our students and the people that are in our bead group is that when you're making any kind of fringe, you want to make sure that each one of those loops is securely knotted. So if at any one time any one of them break, you're not going to lose the entire set of fringe. So you can see that this happened here. So you know it's a maker who has worked with fringe before and knows to be able to make those knots to not lose their work. One of the things we notice also is that even though the stitches are even, the beads for the actual edging are just on the front, whereas contemporary makers will have that bead edging go completely from the front to the back. And you can see where the stitches are actually right on the very edge. And now what we would do is we would cut out the piece and have an extra maybe like 1/4 of an inch or so to wrap around onto the back so there wouldn't be a raw edge exposed. And part of the edging is to cover that to make sure that it doesn't fray as time goes on. and you can see where it has started to lose the beads, and you can see the different layers that were used within the piece itself.
Whatever was available, maybe like a cereal box or something, I'm not sure, but or whatever kind of, I used like a cracker box, something that they had. And what they did was cut that same shape out and put it on the back, so it was kind of like a layered together piece to make it so it was nice and firm, so it would stand against the wall and not use its shape. Whereas now we still utilize the same thing. We utilize manila folders or cardboard, some kind of cardboard. My favorite happens to be Cheez-Its boxes because they're pretty sturdy. And that's what they use to put inside in between the layers to help maintain the shape, so when it lays against the wall, it'll be nice and flat. We did also notice that whoever did the beadwork along the edge, the stitching is beautiful. I will compliment them. It's nice and even. They've made it so that the beads are laying basically on the front, and all you see is just that little bit of stitching on the back. Good job. Back in the early 1900s, they needed to have some kind of stabilizer within the piece itself, so most of the time they used cardboard. One of the other things that we noticed on the back side, because we were able to flip it over, is that the cardboard that they used was probably at some time bent or damaged. So if you look right along here, you can actually see the seam, and if you can feel it, you can feel where the cardboard was probably one time it was completely flat, but unfortunately somebody probably bent that, whether it was up or down, whichever, but now it has caused a crease to be there within the cardboard itself.
And one of the things to consider when you're deciding on the materials to use is that if you do use cardboard and it accidentally gets a crease within the piece itself, that crease is really hard to take out. So if it gets crushed, like for example here on the corner, you can see where it's misshapen, and that's probably because the cardboard itself was damaged and since then has continued to maintain that shape. And you can see where it's a stress point and it's lost those beads.
And that was when we look and do research on different pieces, we check to see where the stress points are for the wear and tear, because we want to make sure that when you're making a reproduction or making a piece now, that it becomes stable so it'll last longer.
One of the other things we like to look at too is how the piece itself would have been displayed. So we think where this damage occurred at the very top, it might have been where the hanger was. So it might have been a beaded hanger, it might have been a ribbon hanger, but that's probably where this little empty space is here.
This piece to be used now, nobody would probably find a practical use for it. So instead, we would probably try to incorporate it into something else. Maybe make the pattern a little bit larger, and once it becomes larger, maybe make the pocket a little bit deeper so they could keep other things in there. Maybe like your cell phone, your rings, your watch, or even not even sew in the center portion, but make a pocket big enough so that you could put your cell phone in there. So you could still decorate it any way you wanted, but yet from an old piece, having a more contemporary use.
So a lot of the patterns that you would find on your pieces are passed down through the families. So you would be able to take a look at the piece and figure out not only the community that it was made from, but also have an idea of which families created the piece itself. So even in contemporary makers, you'll be able to find those traditional patterns that they used, 100 years ago. They're still using them within the family because they've been passed on for generation and generation.
Right now, we continue to teach. We continue to encourage our students to make their own patterns, but we'd like to acknowledge whoever developed that pattern. So whenever we teach and we share any patterns, we have our students rather, actually put the year on the pattern, write that it was an original, and write the initials of whoever the pattern came from. So if it was somebody that I was sharing my pattern in 2022, they would write the initials MAJ and original. It's important for one thing when we teach is that we feel that whatever was taught to us, that we need to share that information, and we need to, again, acknowledge the people that gave it to us, and we want to continue, so whoever we teach, we encourage them to teach somebody else what they learned.
And that's really our way of making sure that those patterns are revitalized within our own communities so that it's not lost and it continues to go on.